So what happens after he climbs up there and rescues her? But here's the real question: was Pretty Woman ever meant to be a fairy tale? Or was it something far more conflicted, negotiated, and carefully rewritten? Pretty Woman wasn't just a romantic comedy that defined the 1990s. It was a movie rebuilt from the ground up, its tone softened, its meaning redirected, and its performances shaped by decisions most viewers never notice. This is Pretty Woman, 1990. Cast reveals. What most fans never figure out: the hidden choices, restrained performances, and silent compromises that turned a risky concept into a cultural landmark. Stay to the end, because the final reveal explains why this film could never be remade the same way again. Let's pull back the curtain. Fact 1. The movie you know is not the movie that was written. What audiences didn't know is that Pretty Woman begins life as a far darker story. The original script carries a harsher tone, less whimsy, less fantasy, more discomfort. It isn't playful, it's confrontational. As production moves forward, that tone steadily collapses. Scenes are reshaped, dialogue softens, the ending transforms. Not because the story failed, but because the casting changes everything. Once Julia Roberts steps into the role, the film can no longer sustain cynicism. Her presence reframes the entire narrative. It isn't rewritten to be safer, it's rewritten to be warmer. And that decision defines the film you remember. Fact 2. Julia Roberts changes the power dynamic without saying a word. Julia Roberts doesn't play Vivian as passive. She listens, she watches, she reacts. What audiences didn't know is how much of Vivian's strength is nonverbal. Roberts builds the character through posture, timing, and restraint, not speeches. She doesn't demand respect, she assumes it. That subtle choice shifts the story's balance. Edward isn't rescuing her from weakness. He's confronting someone who sees through him immediately. Not dominance, but recognition. And it quietly flips the genre on its head. Fact 3. Richard Gere resists playing a simple tycoon. Richard Gere refuses to portray Edward as a fantasy figure. He avoids bravado, he minimizes swagger, he leans into hesitation. What audiences didn't know is that Gere pushes for vulnerability, sometimes at odds with expectations of a romantic lead. Edward isn't confident in relationships. He's transactional, controlled, emotionally guarded. Gere doesn't sell charm. He sells discomfort, and that restraint makes the romance feel earned, not assumed. Geek Fact 4. The chemistry is real but not accidental. That chemistry isn't luck. It's calibration. What audiences didn't know is how carefully scenes are adjusted once the leads interact. Dialogue is trimmed, pauses lengthen, reactions replace exposition. The film stops explaining feelings and lets them surface. Not louder performances, quieter ones. And that choice allows the romance to feel organic rather than scripted. Fact 5. The famous shopping scene is about control, not fashion. On the surface, it's spectacle. But underneath, it's about power-shifting hands. What audiences didn't know is how deliberately this scene is staged. Vivian walks in uncertain. She leaves centered. The store clerks don't matter. The transformation does. Not material change, but self-definition. The scene works because it isn't celebratory. It's corrective, and Roberts plays it with restraint, never smug, never triumphant. Just resolved. Fact 6. Supporting cast members shape the moral tone. The film's emotional balance depends on its supporting characters. Hotel staff, business associates, casual observers. What audiences didn't know is how intentionally these roles are written to mirror Edward's internal conflict. Some enable him, some challenge him, some quietly judge. They aren't background, they're pressure. And they help steer the story away from fantasy and toward reflection. Fact 7. The director refuses to ironize the romance. Many romantic comedies lean on irony. This one doesn't. What audiences didn't know is that director Gary Marshall insists on sincerity. Jokes are situational, not cynical. Emotion is played straight. No winks, no detachment. That choice gives the film emotional gravity and makes it age better than its peers. Fact 8. Edward's arc is intentionally incomplete. Edward doesn't fully transform, and that's deliberate. What audiences didn't know is that the script avoids turning him into a savior figure. He changes, but imperfectly. The film isn't about redemption. It's about interruption. Vivian disrupts his certainty. That's enough. The ending isn't resolution. It's possibility. Fact 9. Vivian's intelligence is never explained, only shown. The film never justifies Vivian's awareness. She isn't given a backstory speech. She isn't positioned as naive. What audiences didn't know is how radical this is for the genre. She understands systems, she reads people, she adapts quickly. Not because the script tells you, because the performance shows you. Fact 10. The piano scene reframes the entire story. Mid-roll engagement hook. Before we continue, go ahead and like and subscribe because this next section reveals the moment where Pretty Woman quietly changes what it's actually about. The piano scene isn't romantic filler. It's confession. What audiences didn't know is how carefully it's staged. Edward isn't performing wealth. He's expressing something he can't articulate verbally. Music replaces language. And Vivian listens, not impressed, but attentive. Not seduction, exposure. And in that moment, the film stops being a fantasy and becomes human. Fact 11. The ending was designed to feel slightly uncomfortable. The final act isn't meant to feel clean. What audiences didn't know is that ambiguity is intentional. The fairy tale imagery clashes with grounded emotion. Edward arrives dramatically, but not triumphantly. Vivian doesn't melt. She considers. The film refuses total fantasy, and that tension keeps the ending from collapsing into cliché. But fact 12. Class contrast is present but never sermonized. The film shows wealth without glorifying it. Spaces are quiet, clean, isolating. What audiences didn't know is how often silence is used to communicate privilege. Edward's world isn't exciting. It's sterile. Vivian's presence introduces warmth, not aspiration, and that contrast is visual, not verbal. Fact 13. The film avoids moral instruction on purpose. Pretty Woman doesn't lecture. It observes. What audiences didn't know is how many moments resist explanation. Characters make choices. Consequences exist. Judgment is withheld. That neutrality lets audiences engage without being directed. And it's why debates around the film never end. Fact 14. Humor functions as deflection. The comedy often appears when tension peaks. What audiences didn't know is how humor is used to release discomfort, not erase it. Laughs arrive after difficult moments, not to dismiss them, but to survive them. That rhythm keeps the film emotionally accessible without trivializing its themes. Fact 15. The score avoids romantic saturation. The music doesn't overwhelm scenes. It supports them. What audiences didn't know is how restrained the score is compared to similar films. Emotion rises but never floods. That restraint allows performances to lead. Fact 16. Vivian is never framed as an object. The camera stays with her perspective. What audiences didn't know is how deliberately scenes are staged to avoid detachment. She isn't displayed, she's present. And that choice anchors the film ethically even when situations are complex. Fact 17. Edward's business world is depicted as hollow. Deals are impersonal, conversations transactional. What audiences didn't know is how unglamorous his success is shown to be. The film doesn't envy his power, it questions it. And that critique is quiet but constant. Fact 18. The film's legacy is misunderstood. Many people still label Pretty Woman as pure fantasy, a polished escape, a wishful story detached from reality. But what audiences didn't know is that the film's longevity comes from restraint, not indulgence. It rarely pushes emotion to its limits. Instead, it holds back. It lets moments breathe, feelings surface naturally rather than being announced. That restraint is why the film continues to be reinterpreted across generations. Different audiences see different meanings because the movie doesn't lock itself into a single message. It doesn't demand agreement. It doesn't insist on fantasy. It invites reflection. That openness allows the story to evolve with its viewers rather than age against them. The film survives not because it promises perfection, but because it leaves space for imperfection. And in a genre often built on exaggeration, that quiet balance becomes its most enduring strength. Fact 19. The cast plays against expectations. One of the film's most overlooked achievements is how deliberately the cast avoids exaggeration. No one plays to extremes. No character becomes a caricature. What audiences didn't know is how intentional that restraint is. In many romantic films of the era, emotions are heightened and personalities amplified. Pretty Woman moves in the opposite direction. Performances are grounded, measured, and emotionally controlled. Julia Roberts resists turning charm into excess. Richard Gere avoids grand gestures or dominant confidence. Supporting characters stay human rather than symbolic. That collective restraint creates credibility. The story may flirt with fantasy, but the people inside it feel real. This is what separates the film from its imitators. Others copy the structure. Few replicate the tone. Loud performances date quickly. Subtle ones endure. And it's that refusal to overplay emotion that quietly anchors the film decades later. Fact 20. The movie trusts the audience more than it seems. Pretty Woman rarely explains itself. And that's a risk. What audiences didn't know is how much the film relies on viewer intuition. Motivations are implied, not outlined. Emotional shifts happen in silence. Meaning emerges through pauses, glances, and timing rather than dialogue. The film assumes the audience is paying attention and rewards them for it. That trust is rare, especially in a genre known for clarity and repetition. Instead of spelling out every feeling, the movie allows interpretation. Viewers fill in gaps. They decide what moments mean. That approach creates engagement rather than instruction. It's why scenes linger long after they end. The story doesn't push emotion toward the viewer. It waits for the viewer to meet it halfway. And that quiet confidence, trusting the audience to understand without being told, is one of the film's most overlooked strengths. Bonus fact: the biggest secret isn't a scene, it's restraint. What audiences didn't know is how easily this movie could have collapsed into exaggeration. Instead, it pulls back. No grand speeches, no perfect transformations, just two people interrupted by connection. Pretty Woman endures not because it promises fantasy, but because it tempers it with honesty. Behind the smiles, shopping bags, and sweeping gestures lies a film shaped by caution, craft, and performances that refuse simplification. If this breakdown changed how you see the movie, like, subscribe and comment with the next film you want uncovered, because some romances aren't just written, they're negotiated, shaped, and quietly revealed. Tagline: not a fairy tale, a human one.